Hi, my name is Keto and I am part of the staff here at Collective Church. Thank you so much for joining us. You are about to watch one of the messages from our Sunday services. I trust that it blesses you.
So we've learned over the last few weeks that we need to grow before we go. You see, we get it backwards. Sometimes we want to go, we want to get moving, we want to end up somewhere. And so we get going without asking God, is it time? Am I ready? And when we end up there, what we find ourselves stepping into is something we were never ready for. And sometimes we lose what we were asking God for because we just can't, we haven't grown. And so in God's upside down kingdom, it's not go to grow, it's grow to go. That when you grow on the inside, when you become who God wants you to be, that's when he opens doors for something new, right? And there's this guy, Joseph, and he has just been through so many crazy things. If you know the story, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We've been discussing it over the last few weeks as well. But he's been through a whole long journey of growing in order to go. And that journey started with a dream. God gave him a dream. And that dream held within it authority, right? There was an authority. If you remember the dream, he dreams about essentially his family, his brothers, and then subsequently his mother and his father bowing before him. And so God says, at some point in your future, I am going to set you up in a position of authority. And as a young man, he was about 17 years at the time when he has this dream, he doesn't quite know how to deal with this because he hasn't grown yet. And so he goes immediately to his brothers and to his parents and he says, hey, y'all are going to bow before me. I'm the one in authority. And his family is like, excuse me? You are the youngest. And we know that his father loved him, in fact, loved him more than all of his other brothers. But even his father was like, listen, stay in your lane, my friend. But Joseph's journey starts with a dream. And your and my journey starts with a dream. So I'm asking you, as we set up this message today, what's your dream? What's your goal? What are you asking God for? Or more than that, what has God said and placed inside of your life where he's taking you? What do you know is your dream that comes from God? Our story starts with a dream, but it doesn't end there. You know, we have this vision of what we think our future looks like, but God knows what it actually looks like. And those dreams that he sets in our heart are not meant to force us into a box, like if this is what he said, that's the end goal. No, what God does is he gives you what you need, that in the times of difficulty, you can hold on to hope. He gave you the dream, not because that's exactly what your life is going to look like. I mean, think about Joseph's dream. It was the sets of grain that were bowing down before him, and then it was a sun, moon, and 11 stars. And just note here, I want you to see that just for a second, just because it's beautiful. It was the sun, moon, and 11 stars. But Joseph was the 11th brother. His younger brother had not yet been born, so it should be the sun, moon, and 10 stars. But God will prophesy in the dream at the beginning of the journey what is coming at the end. And you can't define what that looks like, but when you get there, it's going to make sense. So instead of trying to achieve the dream, trying to gain the authority, let's grow so God can open the door for authority. All right, so this is Joseph's life. We've been looking at it to try and get out of it all the things that are meaningful to us. And I've said this a few times. I want to keep reiterating. This story happens in Genesis, and it's the family of the Bible. It's like if there was one family that's the most important family outside of Jesus, it's these guys, right? Because it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob's son is Joseph. This is the family. Without this family, there is no nation of Israel, and there is no Jesus. And that means there's no us. There's no freedom. There's no life. It's super important who this family is. And this is God's story. This is his big, massive, life-changing story. And so we want to place it there. We want to allow this story in Genesis to mean more than just what's ambition for my life or success in my life. But at the same time, I want to learn everything I can from these practical stories and apply them to my life so that I can grow. And so what does the story look like so far? You'll remember, we're not going to go deep into it, but Joseph was the beloved son of his father. And he was betrayed by his brothers. So after the dream happens, his brothers begin to hate him because he's loved by his father more than any of them. And he's blessed by his father more than any of them. And so they decide they're going to kill him. And so step one, Joseph is betrayed by his family. Let's just think about this. 17 years old, betrayed by the ones who are closest to him. And his only crime was being loved too much. Super unfair. And Joseph is aware of this. I'm going to show you that in a moment. But he's aware of how unfair his life is. I feel like just in a moment of vulnerability for all of us, I think there are many times that you and I go through moments where we feel like, man, this is just unfair. Why am I going through this? What have I done to deserve this? Joseph feels exactly this way. His only crime was being too loved. And betrayed by his family, at least they didn't actually kill him. They just sold him into slavery. And so he was sold to this guy called Potiphar. And he was the captain of the king's guard. So he was a big deal in Pharaoh, because this is in Egypt. So there was Pharaoh, and there was the king's guard captain. That was Potiphar. So he's a big deal guy. We know the story. We explored it last week. And Potiphar's wife, faithful Proverbs 31 woman, right? Oh, no, she was not. She was ready to be unfaithful to her husband, and she saw that Joseph was handsome, well-built, good-looking. She said, let's sleep together. Joseph says no. And so we've gone through the story. The bottom line is that she grabs his coat, pulls his coat, and he runs and tries to get out of there. But then when Potiphar comes home, the wife is like, hey, your slave, your servant, tried to rape me. And so Potiphar loses it. It says he burned with anger, and he threw him in the king's prison. Now, the king's prison is not a place you want to be, right? The king's prison there's no getting out. If you go into the king's prison, there's only one person that can get you out: the king. That's it. There's no other way out of the king's prison. And so he goes from being the most beloved son, betrayed by his family, sold into slavery, betrayed by his master, and thrown into the prison. He goes from being the top to being at the very, very bottom. And he's a young guy. And in this moment, we said it last week, come on, you can't keep the greater grace of God down. Because when he was a slave in Potiphar's house, he rose through the ranks and became the second in charge of Potiphar's house. And when they threw him in the prison, he rose through the ranks. And for some reason, when you're a prisoner, you're nothing. No one cares about you. But somehow they saw something in Joseph that was so compelling, they made him in charge of all the rest of the prisoners. And the wardens didn't even worry about what was happening in the prison because they knew Joseph was there. He became the king of the prison. But Joseph knew something that some of us need to still figure out a little bit. Or maybe we felt it before, and it's going to come up on the screen. This is something that Joseph knew, right? The king of nothing is still nothing. Okay, watch this. Joseph goes into the prison, and in that place, he rises through the ranks and becomes the one who is over everyone. But the king of nothing is still nothing. If you're king of nothing, you're not ruling anything. And God took me for a moment, because we're talking about grow to go. This is not just about an intense story. There's something here for every one of us to see. Joseph knew something that we don't always know. The king of nothing is still nothing. But I've said this over and over again. Never devalue the season that you are in. We heard it in the offering message today. Don't look down on the difficult or desert season that you are going through, because it is in those moments. Come on, in the Old Testament, people flee into the desert to escape something, but in the New Covenant, people are led into the desert to learn something, led by the Holy Spirit. Come on, this is a huge thing for us to understand, right? Don't devalue the moment that you're in. Because you and I, when you put us in Joseph's shoes, we let our circumstances dictate our attitude towards where we are found. And when that happens, you become like everyone else. Watch this. If Joseph had decided when he got into that prison cell that it was all unfair, that it's not okay, that God has forsaken him, and that it's unfair, he shouldn't have been here, and he chose to let his circumstance dictate his attitude, he would have become like every other prisoner and just been quiet, lived out his life, and probably died in that prison. That would have been that. How many of us are going into a situation where we know there's more for us, we've got a dream from God, but when we find ourselves in that workplace and the circumstances come against us, we let those circumstances dictate our attitude. Everyone else is quiet quitting, so we basically just do the same thing. We become like everyone else and we lose the influence God wanted for us. For some of us, we look at relationships out there and we're like, man, all the marriages are failing, so what's even the point of trying in mine? And we become like everyone else. But Joseph knew something that we need to learn. You do not let your circumstances dictate your attitude. You let God and His purpose dictate your attitude towards your circumstance. And when that happens, you rise to the top. And here's the reality. The only way you learn how to be king in the palace is to first be king in the prison. We heard it this morning as well in the offering. We got to learn what God is teaching us now so that when He opens the door, we're ready for what comes. We got to grow before we go. And you know what? That doesn't make it easy. I'm not telling you that it's easy, that now it's just easy to go to work when you have a bad boss or a bad system and it's not making sense. It's not easy to do those things. It's not easy to go home to someone who doesn't care, who is not about your feelings, who's not about your life, who's not about you, and just be like a good husband or a good wife. It's not easy to do those things. But when we choose to let God dictate our attitude towards our circumstance, that's when the supernatural changes things that we can't change. And that's where God starts to lead us towards His perfect plan for our lives. Don't devalue it. We look at it as nothing. Well, this area of it's not getting me the influence. I see myself as an influencer, someone who changes the world. This right here is not changing the world, so I don't put my effort in there. But God is saying, no, you learn the ropes here. That's why He says, don't despise the days of small beginnings. That's why our culture code says that we believe big, but we start small. Because we know God's taking us big. We know God's got a big plan for our lives. We're ambitious. We're going. We're getting somewhere. But we also know God's got to teach us. Because I'm not the hero of the story. God is the hero of my story. And I want to know everything He wants to teach me. And so we're not going to let our circumstance dictate our attitude. We're going to let God dictate our attitude because He's leading us out. Even though it's tough, He's leading us out. And so I want to take a minute just to overview the prison story, just to help us understand where Joseph is at and what happens next. And we're not going to read a lot because the next part of this story actually goes over the next 10-ish chapters. So unless we're ready to be here till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we're not going to read 10 chapters, right? But I'm going to overview for it, and we're just going to pull little pieces out, and we're going to see what God has to say. So what happens when Joseph goes into the prison? We see in chapter 39, it says Joseph went into the prison, but he was favored by God, and he rose up, and he became favored by the wardens, and he became essentially like the overseer of the whole prison. Then we pick the story up in Genesis chapter 40. And this is the overview. While Joseph is in the prison, there are 2 new prisoners that come down into the prison with him. And they were the ones who were in service of the Pharaoh. So you can see this is the king's prison, this is Pharaoh's prison, and so Pharaoh's prisoners come. They're these 2 guys. They're the cupbearer, they're the baker, and the candlestick maker. No, just the first 2, right? The cupbearer and the baker, right? So there's the guy that would bring the wine to the king, to the Pharaoh, and the one who would bake him bread and all kinds of things, right? And for whatever reason, they made the Pharaoh really unhappy. And so Pharaoh sends them down into the prison. And you'll see over time, because Joseph has been favored and now he's stepping up, he knows all the prisoners. And one day he comes to them and asks them what must be the most redundant question I've ever seen in the Bible. Why are you guys sad? He asked them. I mean, can you imagine, right? You're in the king's prison. You used to work for the king, right? Now you're in the prison, you're nothing. And Joseph is like, why are you sad? I'm sad because life sucks, man. Because things are not good, and I'm not happy, and obviously, right? But actually, that's not really why they were sad. They were sad because both of them had had a dream the night before, and they both spoke to each other about their dreams, and they realized they weren't normal dreams. They were like spiritual dreams, but there was no one to interpret them. Now watch this. In the kingdom of Egypt at that time, like sorcerers and magi were quite a normal thing, right? Even the interpretation of dreams was something that they would try and do in all kinds of weird ways, right? And so they were used to seeing this type of stuff happening in Pharaoh's court. But here in the prison, there was no one to interpret their dreams. And so they're really sad about it. And Joseph comes to them and says these incredible words that the interpretation of dreams comes from God. He says, doesn't this come from God? So tell me your dreams, and I'll interpret them for you. Okay, take a second. I want to explain why this is so important. We're talking about growing to go. In the last chapter, we heard Joseph say these words, I am greatest in the house. He's saying to Potiphar's wife. And he's saying it in like a half good, half bad way. He's like, I've been placed in this position of authority. How could I betray my master? And how could I sin against God by sleeping with you? I'm greatest in the house. And it shows you over and over again. It says God favored him. God's favor was on him. God's grace was on him. God graced him. It's like God was actively doing something in Joseph's life. But Joseph was almost interpreting it like he was great. But you fast forward to chapter 40, and Joseph is no longer saying, hey, I'll interpret your dreams. He says, no, God interprets dreams. And so there's a growth that's happened. It's subtle, but watch it. There's a growth that's happened in Joseph where he no longer thinks he's the man. He no longer thinks he's the center of attention. He's saying, no, God is the center of attention. I've learned, going through all this nonsense I've been through, that God, in fact, is the center of the story. And so if you want interpretation, I'll help you, but not because of me, because of God. He doesn't say to them, I'm the greatest in the prison, and I'll interpret your dreams. He says, no, that's God's job, but I'll help you. And that's exactly what he does. Now, this was an ability given to Joseph. It was a grace of God. It was something that was on his life. He could interpret dreams. And so they tell him their dreams. I'm not going to go deep, but the cupbearer basically sees there are 3 vines and there are 3 cups, and he sees the wine go into the cup, and then he gives that wine to the Pharaoh. And the baker's dream is kind of similar. He sees 3 baskets full of all kinds of bread and great, beautiful baked goods, and he sees them on his head, and the birds are coming and they're eating of these beautiful breads and different baked goods. And so Joseph listens to the dream, and he speaks to the baker, and he says to the baker, to the cupbearer, he says to him, it's good news, man. In 3 days from now, Pharaoh's going to lift your head up. He's going to lift you out of the prison, and you're going back to the service of the king. You're going to go and you're going to be his cupbearer again. Life is going to get good for you. Amen. And he's like, thank you so much. That's incredible. That's awesome. And now hearing the good news, the baker is like, awesome, man. What does it mean for me? And this is again where the Bible gets Bibling. Joseph says to him, soz, mate, it's not so great for you. In 3 days from now, Pharaoh's going to lift your head as well, but then he's going to chop it off. And he's going to mount you on a pole, and the birds are going to eat you. And that's the last we hear of the baker. He never speaks again. I feel for this guy. It's not fair, man. It's not fair. But I don't know his life. I don't know what happened in the baker's life. But here's what happens. Exactly as Joseph interpreted, that's exactly what happens. And so 3 days later, it's the Pharaoh's birthday. And being in a good mood, he decides to bring these guys that he'd thrown in prison back out of prison. And he's in such a good mood that he brings the cupbearer back into his service, and he does exactly what Joseph interpreted. He kills the baker. Intense story, right? But we see the supernatural gift of God working in Joseph's life. And we've seen what Joseph knew. Joseph knew that even though he was king of nothing in the world's eyes, in God's eyes, he was learning and growing. He knew that. But I want to show you what Joseph felt. Because Joseph, this whole time, while he has this super Christian, just best guy in the world attitude, it's like no matter where you take him, he's like, no worries, I'll go to prison and I'll be a good servant there. And I'm like, Joseph, please, man. Like, are you really like that? Are you really human? Yes, he's really human, and we can see it here. If you've got your Bibles, turn into Genesis chapter 40. We're reading from verse 14. This is right after he has interpreted the cupbearer's dream, and it's all going to go well with him. And so he says this to the cupbearer. Genesis 40, verse 14. It says this, Joseph talking to the cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, watch this, remember me. Just take note of that. Remember me. Remember me. When all goes well with you, remember me. And show me kindness. Come on. Can you feel Joseph's heart right now? He's like, man, no one shows me kindness. All I do is my very best, but no one shows me kindness. All I do is give my all, but no one shows me mercy. No one remembers me. I get stuck in this space, man. It's him pouring out his heart. Remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. Come on, can you see Joseph? He doesn't want to be there. He's not excited about being in this prison. He wasn't excited about being thrown into this place. He says, verse 15, I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in this dungeon. Joseph was well aware that his story was completely unfair and crazy and difficult, and he wasn't happy about it. He felt it. Guys, Joseph felt the fact that he did his best and got given the worst. I don't know who else feels that way. Sometimes I'm giving my all into my boss, my all into my workplace, and everyone else gets promoted, but not me. I'm giving my all into my spouse, my all into my kids, into my family, but no one shows me kindness. No one takes care of me. In fact, I get pushed down and no one takes care of me. Joseph felt this way. And I want you to see this. It's actually almost a little bit heartbreaking. His words are, remember me. Right? Those are his words. Put it up. There's 2 slides, my friend. Put up, remember me. All right, hold it there. Hold it there. Yeah. Remember me. See there. He's saying this to the cupbearer who's about to just enter into a good, beautiful season of his life. Remember me. But the heartbreaking words are what comes next. Put it up on the screen for me, man. He forgot him. He forgot him. And as we're like 2/3 of the way through the message, this is where you get the sermon title. Because I don't know how many of us feel this way, right? We are forgotten, but we are not forsaken. You see, Joseph was in that prison, and for the first time, we get a glimpse into what he felt. He felt, man, show me kindness, remember me, mention me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this prison. But the one that he gave life to forgets him. But I want to tell you today, you might feel like you're forgotten, but you are not forsaken. And even Joseph in that prison there, he might have been forgotten, but he was not forsaken. Watch this. 2 years later, oh my goodness, like the story never lets up. It never gets better. 2 years later, the guy had to sit in that dark, gross, broken prison for 2 more years. Watch what happens. Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh has a dream, and no one can interpret it. And then out of nowhere, the cupbearer who's been living his life for 2 years is like, oh yeah, I forgot. There's a guy in the prison, and he interpreted my dream, and I'm sure he can interpret yours too. I mean, better late than never, Sorry, man, I don't know if you've ever been forgotten by someone, and sometime later they're like, oh yeah, I was supposed to do that thing for you, wasn't I? And you're like, yeah, you were. You promised me. But I mean, I got a good attitude. I'm a Christian. I forgive. 2 years later. And so this is how the story unfolds, right? Pharaoh has a dream. I'm not going to talk so much about the dream. It's in depth. You can go and read it for yourself. Pharaoh has a dream. No one can interpret it. And so they get Joseph out of the prison and they clean him up and they wash him and they cut his hair and they shave his beard and they make him all good and pretty and they present him to Pharaoh. And in that moment, in one instance, Joseph goes from the prison to the palace. And I want to show you something here. If the cupbearer had remembered him the day after he got out of prison, there would have been no dream for Joseph to interpret and no reason to get him out of the prison. It's rough, but it's real, guys. In fact, the entire story works this way. Because if Joseph had stayed at home and his brothers had not sold him into slavery, he would have just remained the son of Jacob. And that would have been as far as his life went, but God had bigger plans. And so he had to be sold into slavery. It had to be the Ishmaelites that took him and sold him to the Egyptian Potiphar. Because if he wasn't in Potiphar's house, the captain of the king's guard, he doesn't go into the king's prison. Come on. If he wasn't betrayed by Potiphar's wife, he wasn't going to make it into the king's prison. And if he's not in the king's prison, he doesn't meet the cupbearer. And if he doesn't meet the cupbearer, he never gets into the palace. Guys, I don't know what your story looks like, and I'm not trying to glorify pain, and I'm not trying to say we should seek out hardships, not by any means. But I promise you, if it hasn't come to pass yet, if the breakthrough hasn't come yet, there's a reason, and God is working on your behalf, and our faith and our trust is in Him, not because He changes our life tomorrow, but that He works all things for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose, not mine. None of this would have been in Joseph's, 10-step plan to success. You know what I'm saying? Like if Joseph wrote a book at 17 years old, he would have just said, you know what, life is good. And I'm loved and favored by God. And so you should be too. And just live a great life. That would have been the extent of what he has to say. But now, if he had written the book in the prison, he would have been like, you know what, everyone forgets you, but have faith in God. But right now, we get Joseph from the prison to the palace. I want to say this to you, and I want to say it humbly because I'm not here to preach at you. Sometimes our biggest breakthrough comes after our lowest moment. And we can't even predict how quickly God can change a situation around. How quickly it goes from the prison to the palace. When you go your own route, you'll walk around the desert 40 years to get to your purpose. But when you go God's route, it's sometimes so quick. But we have to trust Him through the process. And so finally he's remembered, and he's able to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And so the long and short of Pharaoh's dream is that he dreams of these 7 beautiful, lush, fat, good-looking cows. And then he dreams of 7 really sickly, ugly, horrible-looking cows. And the 7 ugly, disgusting cows eat up the nice cows. But they stay gross and ugly. This is just lovely. I love this book. It's a beautiful, beautiful image. And he sees also the same with wheat and grain. There's these great, big, strong 7 kind of stalks of grain, and then there's these sickly, evil-looking 7 ones that come out. And these grain, these heads of wheat, they consume the other ones, but they remain sickly and disgusting. And he says to all of his magi and all of his sorcerers, what does this mean? And no one can interpret. But Joseph comes up and says, okay, well, it's real simple. But I want you to see what Joseph says to Pharaoh. Because this guy's been cleaned up, placed in front of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh looks at him and says, interpret my dream. And Joseph says to him, I cannot do it. I want you to see the growth. It's now 2 years later, and it's not even just interpretation is God's. He says to Pharaoh, the only one, he would have said anything. I don't know if you would be like me in this situation, but if Pharaoh was like, I'll get you out the prison if you interpret, I'll be like, well, this is exactly what it means. That, it's going to be 7 super cows, they're coming, and you're going to ride them into the sun. You know, like, I would say anything to keep me out of the prison. You know what I'm saying? And his response is, I can't do it. I'm like, Joseph, don't say that. Say anything else, you know? I cannot do it, but God can. Come on. You can't get yourself out of the prison, but God can. You can't find your way to the palace, but God can. You can't fix your relationship, fix that thing, achieve your dreams. You can't, but God can. Joseph learned this as he grew through his journey. I cannot do it, but God can. And this is the last thing that he learns. We don't trust people. We trust God. And that's an easy thing to say as a Christian, but in reality, we got to learn what that actually means. We don't trust people because people will let you down time and time again. Pastors will let you down. Churches will let you down. People will let you down. But God never will. He never, ever will. And so we don't put our faith and trust in people. We place it in God. And yes, God will use people to further your story and to open doors for you, but we don't trust people, we trust God. Joseph had to learn that, and he could only learn that because he said to the cupbearer, remember me, but he forgot him. I got to trust God. And so he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. It's going to be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of good harvest, and then 7 years of famine. And it's going to hit not just Egypt, but the whole surrounding area. And so you got to store up for yourself 7 years worth of grain so that when the 7 years of famine come, you are taken care of. That's your dream. Mic drop. And he's like, cool, you better get someone to do this for you. And Pharaoh's like, you're the guy. If you've got the Spirit of God inside of you like this, who better to do this plan than you? And so I want you to see something. When we go, before we grow, people see us for who we are, and that's all you get. But when you grow, before you go, people recognize the Spirit of God inside of you, and they follow you because of that, not because of you. And so they recognize it. And I want you to note here, we said last week that the coat is the thing. It's tying all these stories together. Guys, there are these beautiful pieces of imagery that God places on purpose. We see a coat of many colors when he's a 17-year-old beloved son, and it's taken from him because his father can't get him into the palace. And when he goes into Potiphar's house, he's given a robe that he wears as a servant. And so Potiphar's wife takes that robe from him because they couldn't get him into the palace either. But when he goes from the prison to the palace, the Pharaoh takes him, puts a ring on his finger. Guys, recognize the symbolism here. A ring on his finger and a robe on his back that says, you speak for the king. I want you to see this coat idea has been playing all the way through. That when we place our trust in a season, the authority and the identity that comes with a human season, we miss where God wants us to go because we actually have to let go of the season that came before us to step into the season that's coming. For some of us, we even have to let go of what that business was going to look like because God's building something new. The dream is still the same, but the business that's making it happen has changed because God is alive and living and is moving with you. For some of us, it's the same for our relationships. I say this humbly again. For some of our relationships, we're not going back to what it was or the good version of what it might have been. No, it's something new. And me and my wife or whatever relationship you're dealing with have to understand it's something brand new. And when God places you in that place, you are not just clothed with his identity, his authority. They put a ring on your finger. And the authority of the king rests on you. This is the authority that came purposed from God. And so I want to say as we wrap up this message today, I've got a few more things to say, but I'm going to do them next week. We are going to have one more. For time's sake, I'm going to end it here. But I want to show you the story of Joseph and the story of Jesus and how they play together. There's so many beautiful things that we all need to see. But today, what is important for us right now? God has a plan for your life. He's got a reason why He made you. And you know what it is. This is the first thing I want to back every one of us up. You know what God made you for. For some of us, we're like, I don't know what that is. I really don't know what that is. That's okay. Break away from everyone else's voice telling you who you should be and go and seek God and let Him inform you as to who He made you to be so that He can give you a dream. Because when the dream comes from God, that's the thing you hold on to when the circumstances don't match the dream. Does that make sense? Because every single one of us is going to go through a story, a journey of growth. Because God's not just taking us somewhere. He wants us to be someone. God is not interested in what you do. He's interested in who you are. And He wants to make you someone of influence who not only will make a success of whatever you do, but influence the people around you because of who you are. And so in the same way that Joseph had to take a step back and realize that he's not going to let his circumstance dictate his attitude, but he's also not going to trust in people. He's going to trust in God even when people let him down. We're going to make the same choice. I don't know who's let you down in your life. Maybe there's been a pastor who's let you down. Maybe there's a friend or a spouse or someone who's let you down. Today I'm telling you, your hope and your faith is not in the person. It's not in the church, the pastor. It's not in the people. Your faith is in God. Because He's the one that leads you. He's the one that guides you. And He's the only one that can restore, redeem, heal. He's the only one that can open the doors to your future and your destiny. And so I remind you today, you're here for a reason, and you should relentlessly pursue that reason. I'm here to be a pastor. That's who God has made me to be. That's my purpose. And what that's going to look like, I trust God for. But I'm going to relentlessly pursue my purpose no matter what comes my way, because I know where God is taking me. Where is He taking you? Trust Him. And no matter what the circumstances look like, pursue that with all your heart, all your soul, trusting Him. He's going to lead you to the right place.
We have come to the end of our message, y'all, and we really hope that you had a good time and that you were impacted by this message. We upload these videos on a weekly basis, and for more information, please log on to our website, www.collective.org.za. See you next time.